It goes without saying that one of the most crazy stories we have seen in the National Hockey League the past few years has been the emergence, the sustenance, the explosion of offense, and the continued success of Tampa Bay Lightning forward Brandon Hagel. A guy who is arguably on one of the best contracts in the NHL. At 27 years old, 6'2", 185, Hagel is signed till the end of 2032, making $6.5 million a year. Yeah, he plays for Tampa, so say what you want about the contract being more beneficial to him because of his location versus if he had played anywhere else. But the fact is, Brandon Hagel is a legitimate over point per game caliber guy who had scored 36 goals last year in 71 games. He had 74 total points. He was over a point per game with 6 goals in 7 games in round 1 of the playoffs versus Montreal. And he's also a guy who had 35 goals and 90 points last year. Make no mistake about it, Brandon Hagel is one of the craziest sons of guns to have come out of this entire development system we're going to be talking about here, courtesy of the Buffalo Sabres. Because Brandon Hagel is one of these rare instances where a point-per-game guy can be making $6.5 million a year for the long haul. He will provide ample value to Tampa Bay as the years continue, because he's only 27 years old. Once upon a time, though, Hagel was just a Buffalo Sabres prospect, and the reason we are talking about him and the Sabres today is because of what Hagel said on the Cam and Strick podcast, revealing that despite the Buffalo Sabres asking him to stay in Buffalo and train for 2 straight summers, they never offered him a contract, and they eventually cut him loose with zero explanation. Ladies and gentlemen, did one of the best NHL players and best NHL contracts today get totally screwed over by Buffalo? That's what it seems like. Hagel was initially a 6th-round draft pick by Buffalo in 2016. Getting drafted out of the Red Deer Rebels and the Whitecourt Wolverines in the AJHL and WHL. The years after saw Hagel inevitably be a very productive player in the WHL, maxing out at 102 points in 66 games. Unfortunately, it was around this time where the Buffalo Sabres just didn't give this guy a contract, and Hagel found himself signing with the Chicago Blackhawks system in 2018. He then found himself playing with the Rockford IceHogs for a season, spent parts of the COVID shutdown year in Switzerland, before becoming a full-time Chicago Blackhawk for the 2020-2021 campaign. He opened up his NHL career with 24 points in 52 games. Not bad, honestly, especially for a guy who, at the time, was 22 years old. The next season, though, he came out of the gate lightning hot, scoring 21 goals in 55 games, maxing out at 37 points, and he was so good and so underrated that the Blackhawks found a way to trade Hagel to the Tampa Bay Lightning. And it was a trade that, as my memory serves, what was the Hagel trade? It was like for a few draft picks and everything that Tampa usually ends up giving up in these types of deals. The Blackhawks traded Hagel to the Tampa Bay Lightning alongside 2 4th-round picks in exchange for forwards Taylor Radish and Boris Kachuk, plus conditional 1st-round picks for 23 and 24. Pretty big stuff, not gonna lie. Nevertheless, Hagel found himself in Tampa. He ended up signing the contract that he is on right now, a deal that was signed ultimately on, when was the date here? August 22, 2023. So shortly after he was acquired by Tampa and played a full season with them, scoring 64 points and 30 goals, he found himself a way to get that amount of money, and then immediately put up 75, 90, and 74 points in the years to come. This 74-point season came in 71 games, so obviously Brandon Hagel had more in the tank if he was able to play the full year. And to think, this is a guy that plays with such an edge. He's got that energy-forward PK specialist mold. He's got that buzzsaw-like quality. He's aggressive as all heck. He's able to score goals, and he creates offense. And this is a guy that Buffalo didn't even explain why they let him go. Let's head over to SaberNoise.com and read this piece by Tim Daniels from a Buffalo Sabres writer perspective as to Brandon Hagel leaving the Sabres organization essentially for nothing. The Lightning superstar was originally selected by Buffalo, however, he had never received a contract from them. Hagel doesn't think he heard from then Buffalo Sabres GM Jason Botterill, who now leads the Seattle Kraken front office, about the franchise's decision to relinquish his rights in 2018. Hagel, who ultimately signed with the Chicago Blackhawks before transforming into an NHL cornerstone with Tampa Bay, talked about the Sabres not giving him an ELC during an appearance Tuesday on the Cam and Strick podcast. "Yeah, not really," Hagel said when asked about whether he communicated much with the Buffalo front office about the decision. "My agent just kind of called me and he said an ELC wasn't offered. Then I don't remember who it was, and he just said, 'They're not going to sign you.' I think it was a player development guy who called at the time. He was like, 'Hey, I hope you prove us wrong, but good luck.' Stuff like that. It kind of sucked because I spent 2 summers in Buffalo," Hagel said on the podcast. "They made me. They wanted me to stay in Buffalo. So I was like, I think it's obviously the right thing to do is stay and try to get better." Hagel ended up signing a 3-year ELC with Chicago in October 2018, and then he inevitably became really good. Giving up his rights for nothing will go down as one of the biggest mistakes in Sabres history. This article by Daniels then goes out there and talks about how Hagel would have been the perfect fit on the current Sabres roster. If there's one thing missing for Buffalo ahead of this upcoming year, it's a bona fide first-line forward capable of taking some offensive pressure off the shoulders of Tage Thompson. Hagel fits the bill, racking up 310 points in 338 games over 5 years in Tampa, and he's scored 71 goals over the past 2 years. The Saskatchewan native is also a valuable special teams contributor, playing on both the power play and PK for the Bolts, and he'd perfectly match Buffalo's contention window at age 27. Instead, he'll continue to lace up his skates with the Tampa Bay Lightning, one of the Sabres' toughest competitors in a loaded Atlantic division. It's been a relatively quiet NHL free agent period for the Sabres, who made a run at signing Patrick Kane before he decided to rejoin Chicago. The only notable forward added was Connor Sherry, who will compete for the reserve forward role. So, when you think about how everything's being laid out here, you talk about the guys the Sabres do have, you talk about the actual talent that they've got, and you talk about the lack of a top league superstar outside of Tage Thompson. It's hard to win a Stanley Cup with only one Tage Thompson. You kind of need a bunch of other dudes to step up and ascend to that level too. That's no disrespect to Norris, Benson, Doan, McLeod, Zucker, and everybody else, but none of these guys are like superstar caliber players in the same way that Hagel is. I'm not saying that if the Buffalo Sabres signed Brandon Hagel back in 2018, that 8 years later he'd inevitably be a 90.35 goal guy in Buffalo, but it is quite alarming to see this talented of a guy find himself in a position to legitimately say in a podcast, "Yeah, I don't think Buffalo really gave me a plan. I don't think they gave me an option here. They just let me go. They kind of screwed me over here because they told me to stay in the city 2 years in a row in the summer, and what? They reward my efforts with nothing?" No. I'm putting words into Brandon Hagel's mouth with that assessment, but you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the Brandon Hagel situation between him and the Buffalo Sabres? Drafted by Buffalo, let go by Buffalo, the rest is history, and now he's on arguably the best contract in the league. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.